I think the biggest problem we struggle with as human beings is the fact that we always resist our nature, in the sense that we don't allow ourselves to be who we really are, and instead we look to the future as a means for fulfillment, and we postpone who we currently are and our current contentment in the belief that one day our future self will arrive, and then we can be who we really want to be and who we are deep down. I went on a walk the other day and I was thinking about this, and I was reflecting on the biggest issue I've struggled with over the last 7 years of my life. To put it into context, 7 years ago I was 17, I'm 24 now, and 17 years old was the age at which I started self-improvement. And the biggest issue I've dealt with has been the idea of arrival, which has manifested in the statements of, if I self-improve enough, then maybe one day I'll arrive at a point where I don't have to self-improve anymore. If I work hard enough, then one day I'll earn enough money and then I can relax. Or last one, and the worst one, if I increase my productivity, then maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to justify my experience and my existence a little bit more. And it's this idea of postponing our current self and who we truly are into the future, and resisting the nature of who we are as human beings, which means that we are a ever-flowing and changing process. We're not something static. We're not something hard and rigid and stubborn. We're an evolving process. But we don't like to embrace the idea that we're always changing, because we want to be fixed. We want to be rooted. We want the belief that we can just act once, we decide our values once, we arrive at a conclusion once, and then the rest of our time can be spent relaxing into the freedom that we've arrived into. And an analogy comes to mind here. I'm not sure if you've heard of the Greek myth of Tantalus, but essentially the word tantalizing in English comes from this Greek figure in mythology called Tantalus, and he was cursed by Zeus to remain for eternity in a pit of water, where the water came just above his chest, and there was forever a ripe dangling fruit just above his head that he could look towards to quench his hunger, but every time he reached up to grab the fruit, it receded from him and was just always out of grasp, and the water, whenever he was thirsty, would always recede from him as well, so he could never quench his thirst. And this is how I feel we live when we postpone our current self into the future and we don't relax into who we really are. Now, the reason why I've been thinking in these stream of thoughts is because I've been reading this incredible book on becoming a person by Carl Rogers. Maybe you've heard of Carl Rogers before, but if you haven't, he was a Canadian psychologist who single-handedly revolutionized psychotherapy. He died in 1987, so he was around between the 1940s up until his death. And the reason why he revolutionized therapy is because he introduced something he coined client-centered therapy, where he believed that every human being has an innate drive towards self-actualization. And what it means, even though he put it in quite vague terms, to self-actualize means to become who you truly are. And he also believed that one of the great ways we can facilitate this growth within us, this moving towards a positive direction, which we are innately called to do, it can be further facilitated through the relationship with a therapist. But the way the therapist could best facilitate this growth within an individual was by introducing something in the relationship called unconditional positive regard, whereby the therapist was in full acceptance of whatever material, emotions and problems the client would bring to the interaction in order to help this person become who they truly are. And in order to do so as well, the therapist couldn't bring any false personality or facade to the interaction. They had to be themselves, which in the eyes of Rogers meant you are one with your feelings and your experiencing of them. So you integrate your feelings. And he says many times throughout this book the phrase that I've put as the title of this video: you are not a product, you are a process. And it clicked in my mind. Something just clicked where I understood we resist so much of our change because we want certainty. We want the certainty of personality. We want the certainty of knowing who we are and what we stand for at each moment in time. And we're not open to the experience of our evolution as a sensitive human being who is always changing. And there's one thing that Carl Rogers mentioned. He said that one of the main reasons why people end up in therapy is because in one way or another they are resisting their inner feelings and this inner guide that we feel towards self-actualization. And after a few therapy sessions they start to become more themselves. There's also a psychological bias at play here called the end of history illusion, whereby we believe that who we are today will be like it forever and we're never going to change. But all you need to do in order to snap out of this is just have a quick reflection on who you were 3 months ago, who you were 6 months ago. Very different to who you were today. In fact, you might even be a bit embarrassed as to who you were a few months ago, which is very normal. And at the end of this video, I'm going to propose quite a revolutionary idea that, if understood, I know will change our lives forever. Built up the expectation. But before we get into that, I just want to read a quote from Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who Carl Rogers mentions multiple times throughout this book. Kierkegaard said, upon this theme of being your true self and embracing change, an existing individual is constantly in process of becoming and translates all his thinking into terms of process. It is with him as it is with a writer and his style, for he only has a style who never has anything finished, but moves the waters of the language every time he begins, so that the most common expression comes into being for him with the freshness of a new birth. That's quite wordy, but essentially what he was getting at was this, capturing this idea that we are always changing. We seek the certainty of character and living in line with a persona we've set for ourselves 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and values that we set time ago that we still want to maintain, because if we accept the fact that we are ever changing and we're not something static in time, then we're plunged into a world of not knowing what to grasp onto. But I feel like this idea of becoming a self-actualized person involves a letting go of your resistance to change. And I'm reminded of a story. When I was 17 or 18, I got into the NoFap community, which if you've never heard about it, it's an online community where men who have stopped watching porn and stopped masturbating gather on self-improvement. And when I was 18, pardon me, I used to post a lot of motivational quotes on the Reddit forum. And there was this one time I posted a quote from Alan Watts, which at the time got a lot of backlash. And the quote was, "You are under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago." And the backlash it experienced at the time was, oh, that's bad, because a man who is changing his mind all of the time and who doesn't act with consistency can't be trusted and is very volatile. And at the time I agreed with the comments. But now, in the light of what I've just come across with this idea of we are processes, not products, this quote makes a lot more sense now. You are under no obligation to be who you were in the past, nor are you under any obligation to have your current actions be dictated by decisions that you've made in the past either. It's almost like you have to give yourself a permission to be yourself. And the analogy I think of with this is, it's like flowing downstream rather than clambering upstream. The extent to which we seek the future to give us present contentment is an illusion. These statements I mentioned at the beginning of this video of, if I do enough self-improvement, I can complete the game. That's what we want. We want to complete the game. We want things to not be a never-ending process. Hence, we want to be a product. We want to be static in time. We want to be dead and hard like a rock or a keyboard. But the idea of flowing downstream means you go into the nature of who you actually are. And the interesting thing, because some of this might be sounding quite vague, but with becoming who you are, it involves a relaxing into yourself. In the same way as a therapist won't give you advice, no one can teach you how to be who you are. It's something that's revealed to you through understanding the emotions that you're currently feeling in full acceptance, and the revelations that your inner self makes to you as well. But you have to be present to listen to that inner self. You can't be clambering around waiting for the future self to suddenly come upon you. You have to be present with where you are now and understand that this moment is enough. What you're doing is enough. Where you are is enough. This moment as a whole is enough. And when you're present with yourself, you're able to relax into who you are, which is, you'll discover it. It's for you, it's not for me to say. But in a general sense, you can relax into your nature as a changing, ever-flowing being, knowing that who you were 3 months ago is very different to who you are now. And you will never arrive at a point where you have self-improved enough and you've worked on yourself enough to then relax the rest of your days away. Your personality doesn't become fixed. It's an ever-flowing process. In fact, Carl Rogers said that there's no goal of self-actualization. It's a continuous process, one that we don't necessarily achieve. And he said it can be very frightening in the quote, "Freedom to be oneself is a frighteningly responsible freedom, and an individual moves towards it cautiously, fearfully, and with almost no confidence at first." There's a wasp that's just flown into the room. I hope it doesn't fly over here. Giving yourself permission to be yourself means that you live in full acceptance of who you are and who you are becoming. In the sense that whatever emotions you feel today, whatever emotions you feel tomorrow, you accept them and they're fine. And you accept that some days you might feel tired, you might feel depressed, you might feel sad, you might feel lonely, you might feel anxious. That's all fine. The next day you might feel joyful, excited, over the moon, purposeful, focused. Over the past 7 years, one of the main things that I've grown annoyed at until I've had this realization is I always thought if I had one good day or a solid week, my life is done. And I've acted with discipline, I've done the hard work, and now I can just relax the rest of my time because now I am this person of consistency or discipline. And then one bad day or a low vibration day would come where I'm procrastinating and I didn't want to do whatever I felt I needed to do. And then I'd be like, oh, why does life have to be this up and down process? I was trying to make the tail wag the dog, as Alan Watts says. I was trying to put legs on a snake. I was trying to solve a problem that was inherently unsolvable. I was trying to resist the fact that I'm a changing human being and that we're all sensitive, which means that we're very different from animals. We're very different from the wasp that's just flew into my room, in the sense that we have self-awareness and we are able to introspect, much to our detriment or our benefit. Give yourself... my time! There we go, it's gone out. Now I've opened the window and about 10 more are going to come in, but anyway. There's also an idea... the quote I wanted to mention. When talking about the good life, Carl Rogers also said, "The good life, from the point of view of my experience, is the process of movement in a direction which the human organism selects when it is inwardly free to move in any direction." This idea that the therapist adopts this unconditional positive regard and full acceptance of the client is very much the relationship we need to adopt with ourselves in order to work with ourselves. When I say give yourself the permission to be yourself, live in full acceptance of who you are and who you're becoming. Don't try and put a should onto your behaviour or who you should be, or an expectation. Because when we flow downstream, all of our rivers look very differently. Some might contain more boulders than others as we flow downstream as well. You can imagine in your self-actualization, you're like, oh, la, la, la. And it's very fun flowing downstream. There might be boulders on the way, there might be alligators in the water, there might be piranhas, but there might be mermaids, and there might be luscious wildlife that you encounter along your way that you had no idea that you might encounter. And there might be boats with other people flowing down the stream who want to get you off your stream and take you onto your boat, which is otherwise saying that when people foist expectations onto you and telling you how you should act, that's the analogy of them trying to get you off your stream and onto your boat. But you have to stay your course, which means that you act in full acceptance of who you are, because who you are is being revealed to yourself. It's something that you discover as a consequence of being present with yourself. Which leads me into this revolutionary idea that I have of self-improvement. I want to change what self-improvement means. And I'm going to do that for myself, and you are more than welcome to join. For me, self-improvement now means being present with myself. And being in full acceptance of myself and who I am, so that who I am can be revealed to me. No longer am I going to see self-improvement as this means of productivity or getting things done, or look into the future as a means of fulfillment and giving myself the illusion that the future will give me this feeling of having arrived at completed things. There's another book that I read on fear from a Vietnamese monk where he said, the kingdom of God is now or never. And I think it is very much the same with our self-actualization. And I think that Carl Rogers would have agreed with that sentiment as well. Relaxing into who you are is the process of being a sensitive human being who is constantly flowing and changing. And this idea of relaxing as well, I'm reminded of another story where a few weeks ago I heard this interview with this CEO who was asking his other CEO friend, let's call him Jim, how do you work so much? You know, you're working like 15, 16 hours a day. How do you not get tired or burned out? And Jim turned to him and said, it's because while I'm working, I'm relaxing. Which also reminds me of another conversation I had with my auntie Julie, who is a yoga instructor, and she's very academically inclined in the yogic traditions and has taught me much of what I know about Hindu religion and philosophy. And me, Julie, and my cousin Brandon, who me and Brandon are very like-minded philosophically and scientifically, and my auntie Julie was saying about how many of the ancient yogis didn't need to sleep as much because they were relaxing throughout the day in everything that they were doing. And me and Brandon at the time questioned the scientific validity of what she was saying, but now I realise it was wrong to question the scientific validity of what she was saying, because what she was saying was right. When you relax into yourself, you live in an acceptance of who you are and who you are becoming, and it is the difference between floating downstream and scrambling upstream. Self-improvement is about being present with yourself and flowing into the process of allowing yourself to reveal who you are to yourself. I want to end this by suggesting one more thing that is at the core of this book, The Way of the Superior Man, which was another idea that when I read it just unlocked something in my mind. And he says in this book, you are always searching for freedom. And I've used the word freedom throughout this video to refer to the illusion of freedom that we want to give ourselves by thinking that in the future lies our freedom. And when I was working in my last job, as some of you know, I was a salesman in a leisure centre. There was 3 days after I finished reading this book where I had a little note card on my desk. And, you know, the gym was busy, there was loads of people around, but I was in the office alone for about, over a period of 3 working days. And I had a lot of time to think through my new revelations of reading this book. And I had a little note card on my desk, and it said, be the freedom you're searching for. And I was thinking about this again and again and again, and I felt so much more relaxed into who I was, and the work that I was doing and the way I was socialising was so much more abundant and present and flowing. And I felt that I could die in that moment content, not because of what I've achieved, but because of how I was situated within myself, which was flowing downstream. So be the freedom that you are searching for. Those moments where you convince yourself very strategically, if I do this, then I will feel this in the future. If I earn enough money, then I can relax. If I do enough self-improvement, then I'll know myself enough to then relax into myself. Yourself is already here. You're not a hard thing. You're not static. You're ever flowing and you're ever changing. You just need to make sure that you're present with yourself along this journey. And your relationship with yourself will become so much better when you allow yourself to be the freedom that you're always searching for right now. So, to round this off, flow downstream instead of clambering upstream. Give yourself the permission to be yourself and to have yourself revealed to you through listening to yourself and your inner intuitions and accepting your emotions and how you're currently feeling, and accept the sensitive, fluctuating experience of being a human being in full acceptance. And gauge your self-improvement on the extent to which you feel present with yourself and you are allowing yourself to be revealed to you without expectation and without oughts and shoulds. Yeah, I think that's the key to the good life. This is what happens when I decide to record an unscripted video. I don't know how long this has been. Was greeted by a wasp. He was clearly liking the self-rambling awareness chats. But anyway, I'll leave this there. Give yourself the permission to be yourself. Stay disciplined, playful, and dangerous. Adios, muchachos.